The second sun of Silax was kissing the horizon, painting the endless dunes in shades of burnt orange and deep violet. The heat of the day began to relinquish its stranglehold, and the desert world breathed a sigh of relief. For Jax, this was the time to work. Her boots, worn soft and supple, made no sound as she trekked across the cooling sand. She was a creature of the twilight, her skin tan the color of old leather, her eyes the sharp, patient gray of a storm-washed sky. She moved with the economy of motion that only a lifelong survivor of Silax could master. It was the smell that found it first, not the familiar sense of dust and dry rot, but the acrid, chemical tang of scorched alloy and ozone. Her head lifted, nostrils flaring. A crash recent, her pulse, usually a slow, steady drum, picked up its rhythm. A crash meant salvage. Salvage meant water credits, parts, a reason to keep breathing for another cycle. She found the furrow first, a great, ragged scar torn across the desert for half a kilometer, littered with twisted metal and blackened crystal that gleamed in the fading light. At its end, partially buried in a dune, was the ship. It was like nothing she'd ever seen. Not a blocky freighter or a patched-together rust bucket, but a thing of dark, graceful curves. Its hull a material that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it. It was beautiful, and it was utterly, completely doomed. Jax approached with the caution of a sandfox, her hand resting on the grip of the pulse pistol at her hip. The ship was silent, its death throes over. The main hatch was wedged open, a dark, inviting maw. She slipped inside. The interior was a disaster of sparking conduits and shattered panels. Gravity was offline, and small, strange tools floated in the stagnant air. The air itself was thick with the coppery scent of blood. Her boots magnetized to the deck with a soft click, and she moved deeper, following the trail of greenish fluid splatters in the cockpit. She found him. He was slumped against the main console, pinned by a collapsed support beam. And he was magnificent, tall, even in his current state, with skin the color of twilight, a deep, velvety gray-blue. His hair was not hair at all, but a cascade of fine, flexible silver filaments that fell around his shoulders. Through the torn fabric of his dark uniform, she could see the hard, defined planes of his torso, and the intricate, raised markings that swirled over his skin like tattooed constellations. They pulsed with a faint, internal light, a rhythm that was growing dangerously slow. An alien, a Velian if the stories were true, a warrior race, conquerors. His eyes fluttered open as she knelt beside him. They were a shocking, solid gold, with no visible pupil or iris. They fixed on her, and even clouded with pain, they held a terrifying, regal intensity. "Do not touch me, human," he rasped, his voice a low, gravelly vibration that seemed to resonate in her bones. Jax ignored him, her hands already moving, assessing the damage. The beam was heavy, but her exobracelets, scavenged from a mining bot years ago, whirred to life, granting her the strength to heave it aside with a grunt of effort. She focused on the wound in his side. It was bad. A piece of shrapnel was buried deep, and the green blood was oozing, not pumping. A good sign, but not good enough. "Lucky for you. I'm not great at following orders," she muttered, pulling a med gel applicator from her pack. His hand, surprisingly strong, shot out and gripped her wrist. His fingers were long, with an extra joint, and his touch was cooler than a human's. "What is your intention?" "To stop you from painting your cockpit green," she said, meeting his golden gaze without flinching. "Unless you'd rather die here to prove a point." A flicker of something amusement, perhaps, or sheer disbelief crossed his sharp features. His grip loosened, and his arm fell back to the floor with a thud. Conceding, she got to work, cleaning the wound, applying the coagulant gel, and sealing it with a skin bond patch. He watched her every move, his unnerving eyes missing nothing. When the worst was stabilized, she sat back on her heels. "I'm Jax." He was silent for a long moment, just breathing, the luminescent markings on his skin brightening slightly with the relief from the pain. "Kellen," he finally said, the name a low rumble. "Well, Kellen," Jax said, packing her kit. "Your ship is a tomb. You're coming with me." His head lifted slightly, a flash of pride in his golden eyes. "I am not some piece of debris for you to collect. Out here, everything is debris," she replied, her voice flat. You can either be useful debris or you can be dead debris. Your choice. She stood, offering him a hand. He looked at her outstretched hand as if it were a venomous serpent. Then his gaze swept the ruined cockpit, the sparking consoles, the absolute finality of his situation. A low, frustrated sound escaped him. With a grimace of pain, he reached up and took her hand. His was cool and strong in her warm, calloused grip. As she pulled him to his feet, he swayed, his large frame leaning heavily against her for a moment. He looked down at her, his silver hair brushing her cheek. The silence in Jax's home was a living thing, thick and heavy, broken only by the soft, rhythmic hum of the moisture vaporator outside and Kellen's measured breathing. He sat on a low bench made of salvaged ship plating, his posture still impossibly rigid despite his injuries. Jax tossed a bundle of rough spun fabric onto the bench beside him. "Put these on," she said. "Your uniform screams shoot me for my credits." Kellen picked up the trousers and tunic with a look of profound distaste. "This material is abrasive, it's clean. That's a luxury here." She turned her back, giving him a semblance of privacy as she busied herself at a small cooking unit. She heard the rustle of fabric, a sharp intake of breath as the movement pulled at his wound, and a low, Velian curse that sizzled in the air. When she turned back, he was dressed. The simple, earth-tone clothes should have made him look ordinary, but they did the opposite. They framed his otherworldly beauty, the gray-blue of his skin and the silver cascade of his hair now stark and dramatic against the muted fabric. He looked like a king in a beggar's disguise. "How's the side?" she asked, handing him a bowl of thick, nutrient-rich stew. He took the bowl, his golden eyes studying its contents with suspicion. "It is manageable. Your field medicine is surprisingly adequate." "High praise," Jax deadpanned, sitting across from him with her own bowl. "Eat, you need your strength." He took a tentative bite, his expression unreadable. "It is warm, that's generally how food works. I meant," he said, fixing her with that intense gaze. "It lacks the nutrient markers my body is accustomed to, but the warmth is not unpleasant." They ate in silence for a few minutes. The twin moons, Ceres and Vallis, cast long, pale fingers of light through the single window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. Jax's home was carved into the base of a massive rock spire, a sanctuary of cool shadows against the desert's fury. It was Spartan, but neat, every tool and artifact placed with purpose. "You live here alone," Kellen stated. "It wasn't a question. People are complications, a sentiment my people share," he replied, a hint of irony in his tone. "Yet you chose to complicate your existence with me. You were a complication I could potentially trade," she said bluntly. "A functioning Velian noble is worth more than a dead one. Once your people come looking, the reward should be substantial." He actually chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "So, it is commerce, not compassion, it's survival. There's a difference." His eyes scanned the room, taking in the shelves of salvaged parts, the meticulously repaired tools, the small hydroponic garden struggling in the corner. "You are proficient. For a human, and you're condescending. For a Velian," she met his gaze, a challenge in her gray eyes. "You wouldn't have lasted 3 days out here without me." The pride in his eyes flared, but he didn't deny it. "My skills lie in other areas: strategy, fleet command, the intricacies of interstellar politics. Fascinating. Can you tell if a water seam is running dry by the taste of the air? Can you track a silica worm through shifting dunes to find its water cache?" She leaned forward. "Your skills are useless here, Warlord. Here, my skills are the only thing keeping you alive. Remember that." The air between them crackled, not with hostility, but with a newfound, grudging acknowledgement. He was seeing her not just as a primitive, but as a master of her domain. And she was seeing him not just as a prize, but as a thinking, feeling being. Trapped and vulnerable, the moment was shattered by a low, insistent beep from a console on the wall. Jax was on her feet in an instant, her face hardening. She typed a quick command, and a holographic map of the surrounding canyons flickered to life. 3 red blips pulsed ominously at the edge of the screen, moving toward her location. "What is it?" Cullen asked, his voice dropping to a whisper, all traces of his earlier amusement gone. "Company," Jax said, her voice tight. Unwelcome company. She zoomed in on the signals. That's Reese's pattern. He's a scavenger with a bigger gang and fewer scruples than me. He must have tracked the crash, or my trail back. Hurrah smirked, a slow, dangerous expression. Touch me there again, human, and it will be the last thing you do. Jax didn't smile back. She just shifted her weight, taking more of his. Threaten me again, Velian, and I'll leave you for the sandworms. They aren't as picky as I am. For the first time, the smirk on his face seemed to reach his eyes, turning into something genuine, something intrigued. The journey back to her home, under the twin moons of Silax, had begun. Kellen stood, wincing only slightly. Can you fight them? Not head-on. There are too many. She began moving swiftly, activating hidden panels in the rock wall. Inside were weapons, a heavy plasma rifle, a few more pulse pistols, and crude but effective explosive charges. We have to fortify. This place is defensible, but only if we're smart. She tossed the plasma rifle to him. He caught it smoothly, his hands instantly familiar with the weapon's weight and balance. He made a slight adjustment to the power cell housing. Your cyclonic regulator is misaligned. It would have lost containment after 3 sustained bursts. Jax stared at him, surprised. Then she nodded. Fine, you know guns. That's a useful skill here. Can you use one? A slow, predatory smile touched his lips. It was the first truly open expression she'd seen on his face, and it was terrifying and thrilling in equal measure. Oh, yes, human. I can use one. For the next hour, they worked in a frantic, wordless synergy. Jax pointed out choke points and hidden firing lines around the rock spire. Kellen, drawing on his military knowledge, suggested traps and overlapping fields of fire. He moved with a grim purpose, his pain pushed aside by the immediacy of the threat. He was in his element now. As Jax was placing a seismic charge near the main entrance, she felt him behind her. She turned. He was closer than she expected, his golden eyes glowing in the dim light. This Reese. He knows you? Kellen asked, his voice low. He knows of me. We've crossed paths. He thinks I'm competition that needs to be removed, and will he? Kellen's gaze was intense, searching. Remove you? Jax held up a small, metallic remote. He can try. The red blips on the console were at the perimeter of the canyon now. The hum of approaching skiffs grated against the silence of the night. Kellen hefted the plasma rifle, his expression a mask of cold focus. It appears our fates are intertwined a while longer, scavenger, he said. Jax checked the charge on her pulse pistol. Just don't get in my way, Warlord. The smirk returned to his face. I was about to say the same thing to you. The first skiff, a rust bucket held together by paint and desperation, crusted the dune line. Jax and Kellen watched from a narrow firing slit carved into the rock. The night was their ally, the pale moonlight casting long, deceptive shadows. There, Kellen murmured, his voice barely a breath. The lead skiff has a mounted plasma cannon, a priority target. I see it, Jax replied, her cheek resting against the cool stock of her rifle. Reese is probably on the second one. He likes to let others take the first risk. A poor leader, Kellen noted with disdain. Command should be at the forefront. Out here, command is whoever is left standing at the end. The lead skiff roared toward the rock spire, its engine a guttural whine. When it was 50 meters out, Jax pressed a button on the remote. The ground beneath the skiff erupted in a concussive thump that was more felt than heard. A seismic charge. The sand liquefied for a moment, swallowing the skiff's front end and sending it flipping end over end in a shower of metal. And sparks, a cheer went up from the other scavengers, but it was short-lived. Reese's voice, amplified by a crackling speaker, cut through the noise. Fancy tricks, Jax. You always did like to dig holes. Flush her out. 2 more skiffs sped forward, fanning out. Blaster fire streaked from the passenger seats, peppering the rock face around their hiding spot. Chips of stone stung Jax's face. Now, Kellen said, his voice calm. Jax squeezed the trigger of her rifle. A blue bolt of plasma lanced out, striking the cannon on the lead skiff. It didn't explode, but it glowed cherry red and sagged useless. At the same instant, Kellen fired from his position. His shot was not at the vehicle, but at the driver. The man crumpled, and the skiff veered wildly into a canyon wall. Their coordination was instinctual, seamless. Jax provided suppressing fire while Kellen picked off targets with chilling precision. He was an artist of death, each shot economical and devastatingly effective. He understood angles, cover, and suppression in a way Jax had only seen in military manuals. "They are attempting to flank on the left," he called out, reloading with a smooth, practiced motion. "I have a surprise for them there," Jax yelled back, tapping another command on her wrist-gom. A moment later, a scream echoed from the left canyon as a net of energized cables snapped up from the sand, entangling the scavengers and delivering a powerful shock. For a moment, the assault stalled. The scavengers, used to brawls and ambushes, were not prepared for this level of disciplined tactical defense. They were facing a soldier. Reese's skiff now moved forward, stopping just outside of effective rifle range. The man himself stood up, a hulking figure in patched-up body armor. "Jax, I just want the ship and the alien. Give them up, and you can walk away from this. You have my word." "His word is worth less than the sand in my boot," Jax muttered. "He is lying," Kellen said, not taking his eyes off the scope. "He will kill you to eliminate a rival and a witness." "I know." Kellen glanced at her, his golden eyes reflecting the muzzle flashes. "You fight well. For a human." Despite the situation, Jax felt a corner of her mouth twitch. "You're not so bad yourself." For a pompous warlord, a concentrated barrage of fire suddenly hit their position, forcing them to duck behind the reinforced rock. The air sizzled with energy. "They were pinned. They're concentrating fire," Kellen stated. "They will rush us under the cover. I'm out of seismic charges." "The net is down." Jax looked around, her mind racing. There was one last option, a risky one. "There's a rear exit, a narrow tunnel. It leads to a higher ledge overlooking this approach. A sniper's perch," Kellen said, understanding immediately. "But it will leave this position undefended. It's that or we wait for them to come in and finish us." She met his gaze. "I need you to cover me while I make a run for the tunnel. Then I'll cover you from the ledge while you follow." It was a plan built on trust, a currency rarer than water on Silax. He would be completely exposed for the few seconds it took her to cross the open space to the tunnel. And then he would have to trust that she wouldn't just leave him there. His eyes searched hers, reading the resolve in their storm-gray depths. He gave a single, sharp nod. "Go." Jax took a deep breath and burst from cover, sprinting low and fast across the open ground. Blaster fire immediately tracked her, kicking up spurts of sand at her heels. But no bolts hit her. Behind her, Kellen was standing in the firing slit, his plasma rifle roaring, drawing every bit of fire toward himself. He moved with a terrifying grace, shifting his aim from target to target, forcing the scavengers to take cover. She made it to the tunnel entrance and scrambled up the dark, narrow passage. She emerged on the high ledge, gasping for air. She quickly shouldered her rifle and scanned the scene below. Kellen was still in the window, but a near miss had scorched the wall beside him, and she could see a trickle of green blood from his reopened wound. "I'm set," she yelled and opened fire. Her shots were less precise than his, but they were effective harassment. She forced the scavengers to keep their heads down. Seeing his chance, Kellen abandoned the firing slit and sprinted for the tunnel. For a heart-stopping second, he was in the open. Reese himself stood and took aim. Without thinking, Jax shifted her rifle and fired. Her bolt went wide, but it slammed into the engine housing of Reese's skiff, causing it to erupt in a shower of sparks and forcing Reese to dive for cover. It was enough. Kellen vanished into the tunnel. A minute later, he emerged beside her on the ledge, breathing heavily, his hand pressed to his side. The look he gave her was not one of gratitude, but of pure, unadulterated respect. "You saved my life," he stated, the words seeming foreign on his tongue. "You saved mine first," she replied, her heart still hammering. "We're even." Below, with their leader's skiff disabled and facing fire from an elevated, secure position, the remaining scavengers lost their nerve. They collected their wounded and their dead, and their engines whined as they retreated back into the darkness of the desert. The silence that returned was deeper than before, filled with the smell of ozone and blood. Jax and Kellen stood side by side on the ledge, watching the retreating lights. The threat was gone. The fragile pact forged in fire held. And in the quiet aftermath, the space between them felt charged with something new. Something far more dangerous than any blaster bolt. The two suns rose, relentless and unforgiving, bleaching the world of color and mercy. The night's victory felt distant, a phantom memory under the harsh, revealing light. The carcasses of the skiffs smoldered in the heat, and the sand was stained with dark patches where men had fallen. Jax and Kellen worked through the morning, salvaging what they could from the wreckage and resetting the few traps that hadn't been triggered. The work was done in a silence that was no longer uncomfortable, but contemplative. The easy synergy from the battle remained. When Jax reached for a tool, Kellen was already handing it to her. When he needed to move a heavy piece of debris, she was there, her exo-bracelets whirring as she took the weight. "They will be back," Kellen said finally, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of his hand. The simple, human gesture looked strangely natural on him. "I know," Jax replied, sipping from her water canteen. "Reese won't let this go. Not after the humiliation, and not with a Velian warship just sitting out there." She offered him the canteen. He hesitated for a fraction of a second before taking it. His fingers brushed against hers. His skin was still cool, a fascinating contrast to the oppressive heat. He drank deeply. "We cannot defend this position indefinitely against a determined assault. My presence is the catalyst. The logical solution is for me to leave. Draw them away from you." The suggestion hung in the air, sensible and cold. Jax found the idea lodged in her chest like a shard of ice. She looked at him, at the way the sunlight caught the silver filaments of his hair, at the stubborn set of his jaw, at the green stain on the borrowed tunic over his wound. "No," she said, her voice firm. His golden eyes flickered with surprise. "It is the sound tactical choice. This isn't one of your fleet battles. This is the desert. You go out there alone, wounded, with no knowledge of the terrain, and Reese will run you down in an hour. Then he gets you and your ship. That's a losing trade." She shook her head. "We stay. We've finished this." "Why?" The question was simple, but it carried the weight of worlds. Why risk everything for a stranger? For a potential reward that was becoming more abstract by the hour? Jax didn't have a logical answer. She had a feeling, a gut-deep certainty that had been growing since she'd pulled him from the wreckage. "Because I said I would," was all she could muster. He studied her for a long moment, the luminescent markings on his skin pulsing softly, as if in rhythm with his thoughts. "Very well," he conceded. "Then we must take the fight to them." His plan was audacious, reckless, and brilliant. Reese would be licking his wounds, regrouping at a known Kenyan outpost a few kilometers east. He would be expecting a defense, not an attack. They would use the one thing Jax had that Reese didn't, a deep knowledge of the labyrinthine canyons that surrounded the area. They moved out as the heat of the day began to wane. Jax led the way, a ghost flitting between shadows and rock formations. Kellen followed, his larger frame moving with a predator's silence she wouldn't have thought possible. They found Reese's camp exactly where Jax predicted, nestled in a shallow box canyon with a single, easily guarded entrance. A dozen men and women milled about, repairing gear and drinking. Reese was bellowing orders, his ego bruised and festering, from their perch on the high canyon rim. They had a perfect view. "We cannot defeat them all," Kellen whispered. "We don't have to," Jax replied. "We just have to defeat him." She pointed to a narrow, crumbling path that led down the back wall of the canyon, invisible from the main entrance. It was a dangerous descent, but it would bring them out behind a large rock formation right in the heart of the camp. The climb down was a test of nerve and trust. Jax went first, finding handholds and testing footfalls. Kellen followed, his strength making the difficult look easy. When they reached the bottom, they were close enough to hear the scavengers' conversations. The smell of cooked meat and engine grease filled the air. They crept forward, using the large central rock for cover. Their objective was clear: Reese, who was standing by a communications array, trying in vain to boost its signal. They were 10 meters away when a scavenger emerged from behind a tent, relieving himself. He froze, his eyes widening. He fumbled for his weapon. Everything happened at once. The man shouted. Kellen shoved Jax behind the rock as blaster fire erupted. The camp exploded into chaos. They were trapped. So much for the element of surprise. Jax yelled, returning fire. The plan adapts. Kellen shouted back, his plasma rifle cutting down to scavengers who rushed their position. Reese's voice boomed over the din. They're here. In the camp. Surround them. They were outnumbered and outgunned. The large rock was their only cover, and it was being chewed apart by concentrated fire. Jax felt a searing pain in her arm as a blaster bolt grazed her. She cried out, dropping her pistol. Kellen saw it. He saw the look of triumph on Reese's face as he raised his own heavy rifle. Aiming directly at the defenseless Jax, there was no time for thought. Only instinct. In a move that defied his injury and his size, Kellen lunged in front of her, not with his weapon raised, but with his arms spread. His back was to Reese, his body a shield for Jax. The blast from Reese's rifle hit him square in the back. A scream was torn from Jax's throat. Raw and terrible. Kellen staggered, his golden eyes wide with shock, then slammed into her, driving them both to the ground behind the rock. The air left her lungs in a rush. He was a dead weight on top of her. UNMOVING. Reese laughed, a coarse, victorious sound. The alien's down. Get the girl. But his laughter died as a new sound filled the canyon, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through the very rock. A shadow fell over the camp, vast and impossibly fast. Jax, her vision blurred with tears and dust, looked up. Descending from the sky like a avenging angel was a Velian warship. It was larger and more menacing than the crashed vessel, its dark hull bristling with weapons that glowed with a soft, deadly light. It hovered silently, blocking out the suns, and the world fell into a stunned, terrified hush. The scavengers dropped their weapons, staring up in awe and fear. The ship had found them. A ramp extended from the warship, touching the sand with a whisper. A squad of Velian soldiers descended, their armor gleaming, their movements a synchronized ballet of lethal intent. They ignored the cowering scavengers, their golden eyes fixed on the large rock. Jax barely registered them. Her world had narrowed to the weight of Kellen on her, the terrifying stillness of his body. She pushed at him, her hands coming away stained with his vibrant green blood. No, no, no. She whispered, her voice cracking. Kellen, one of the soldiers, his markings more intricate than the others, knelt beside them. His face was an unreadable mask of discipline, but his eyes held a flicker of urgency. He pressed a device against Kellen's neck. A soft chime sounded. He lives, the soldier said, his voice a synthesized baritone. The armor dissipated the majority of the blast. He is unconscious, not dead. He barked orders in his native tongue. And two other soldiers carefully lifted Kellen onto a floating stretcher. Jax stumbled to her feet, her injured arm hanging uselessly at her side. She watched as they carried Kellen up the ramp. The finality of it was a physical blow. This was it. He was returning to his world, to his people. The dessert interlude was over. The lead soldier turned to her. You are the human, Jax. She just nodded, her throat too tight for words. You have our gratitude. The Warlord's beacon was activated during the firefight. We would not have found him so quickly otherwise. His gaze swept over the camp, taking in the scene, the clear evidence of a battle fought and won. He fought beside you. He did, she managed to croak. The soldier regarded her for a long moment, his eyes lingering on the blood on her hands and clothes both red and green. You are injured. You will come aboard. Our medics will see to you. It was not a request. Inside, the Velian ship was a temple of cool, silent efficiency. The air was sterile, the lighting soft and indirect. Jax's wounds were treated by a medic who worked with an unsettling, silent proficiency. The pain in her arm vanished, replaced by a numb coolness. She was given a clean, gray jumpsuit and led to a small, austere chamber to wait. She didn't know how much time had passed when the door slid open. Kellen stood there. He was clad in a fresh, black uniform adorned with silver insignia that denoted his rank. He looked every inch the warlord, powerful and untouchable. Only the slight pallor of his gray-blue skin and the tightness around his eyes betrayed his recent ordeal. They stared at each other across the small room. The distance between them, which had shrunk to nothing in the heat of battle, now felt like an unbridgeable chasm. Your people found you, Jax said, stating the obvious to break the silence. They did. Your ship. The crash. A tactical team is already securing it. The technology will be recovered. He took a step into the room. The scavenger, Reese, and his followers have been taken into custody. They will be processed. Jax shivered at the cold finality of that word. You are well? He asked, his gaze scanning her, lingering on the bandage on her arm. I'm fine. Thanks to you. She wrapped her arms around herself. You shielded me. Why? He was silent for a moment, as if searching for the right words in a language that wasn't his own. It was the only logical course of action, he said, but his eyes betrayed the lie. They held a storm of emotion she couldn't name right. Logic, she whispered, looking down at the pristine deck. Jax. He said her name, and it sounded like a confession. She looked up. He had closed the distance between them. He was close enough to touch. My duty is to return to the Velian hegemony. There is a war, a conflict that spans star systems. My command awaits.